Okay, so welcome back to the channel. One thing I wanted to mention before we start is a few of you have commented on how the audio quality has been really poor in the last few videos. Now I do apologise, not sure what's been going on with the audio quality on the phone, but if I turn and look away or the way I'm holding the phone maybe blocks the microphone, it seems it gets really bad. And I've actually done this video I'm doing now twice already, and the audio was horrendous again. So what I've done, I've gone out and I purchased a Rode Wireless Me microphone kit. So we've got a receiver, a transmitter that's on me as a microphone, and then we've got a receiver attached to the phone. So hopefully now, regardless of where I turn, looking away from the camera or even walking right out of earshot, so I'm not even near the camera, hopefully the audio will be the same throughout and we won't have those sort of issues. So yeah, give me any feedback you can on that, because I want to make sure it's nice for you and makes the video watchable. You know, if you can't hear what I'm saying, then there's not much point in watching it. Also, at the end, if the audio quality is good, I'll be able to die down the music, because some of you say you have to turn the volume up so loud to hear the audio that when the music kicks in at the end, that it's unbearable. You know, it's a bit much. So hopefully that issue is now sorted. Anyway, back to the spindle scenario. The spindle was sent off for a regrind and it's now back. Now, there's a couple of things I need to point out. I sent it off for the regrind. Now, the regrind from Midland Machine Tool Recon Limited was £140 plus VAT, plus your carriage. So I sorted the delivery there and I sorted the delivery back. Now, I sent it in a wooden crate, so it's nice and secure. And they actually get the customers to sort their own courier collections, probably for insurance reasons, so they haven't got to worry about any damaged items in this, that and the other if it's your own courier. So anyway, £140 plus VAT and the courier charges, and that was for the regrind. Now, when they got the spindle, I had a phone call from the owner of the company called Steve, and he said there's an issue with the spindle, and that issue is that it's got a bend in it, quite a bad bend in it. Now, I chatted to him on the phone, really nice bloke, and he said, you know, it's not uncommon, had it many times, there's not much we can't straighten. So he said, leave it till Monday. This was the previous week. He said, I'm off at the moment, but when I'm back in on Monday, I'll have a look. Anyway, he sent me some videos of the bend and the run out and how bad it was. And it was up to sort of 0.2, I think, 0.2 millimeters bend of run out. And then by the time they'd done their straightening work and this, that and the other, I think we were in the 5, I think the maximum was 5 microns, which is, you know, bear in mind, it's a 23-year-old machine, 23-year-old spindle. It's going to be a damn sight better than what it was when I sent it to them, that's for sure. And we were talking about how the bend got in there, and I said, well, I heated the bearings to get them off, and I showed him the link to the video. He watched it, he called me back, and he said the chances are that is where your bend come from. So he said these collars, they've got a big groove around the outside, the shrink fit collar, and this one has got a step in it where you can get a puller on it, and this one, the normal bearing separators aren't so good, but if you make up a tool where it will sit really nicely inside that groove, you said you can press these off with no heat, because compared to some other spindles, there isn't a massive amount of interference fit on here. I can't remember what he said it was. I think he said it was, so don't quote me, but I think he said it's about a 2 thou interference fit, so 0.05 millimeters. So he said they will press off without heat. And he said, watching your video, the chances are you induce that bend with the amount of heat you put into it. And you see in the video that I blued it up from the heat. So lesson learned. Don't do what I do, try and press it off. Right, he straightened it, he got it to the microns of accuracy again. They ground the taper. They found in the original taper that there was a 1/6 thou low spot or wear mark in one area, and that's probably from where the tool comes in for all the years, and it comes in from the tool changer slightly wonky and kind of straightens itself up on the edge of the taper as it comes in, because them tool carousels are not the best. And although they sit upright, it's never going to be perfect. So it's always going to just rub on the taper as it goes and gets drawn up by the drawbar and the pull stud. So there was a 1/6 thou low spot on the taper, and obviously it was in generally poor condition anyway. So once it was straightened and it was ground, the gauge line of the tool ended up being moved back by 0.14 millimeters. So they took 1.14 millimeters back on the grind. The total indicated run out on the taper was 0. At a 300 millimeter position on a test bar, they were at 5 microns, and then it says position 2, 3 microns. So I don't actually know what position 1 and 2 relates to, but 3 microns is around 1/10, and 5 microns is just below 2/10. So on the original paperwork on my VF0E, the test results from the factory show 1/10 run out at 150 millimeters. So in that sense, this should be very good, you know, it should be as good as new. So we've had it reground, we've got everything else ready. One thing I'm going to do, some people sent me links to, or just mentioned to watch the spindle rebuild video on YouTube. I can't remember who it's by, it's about an hour or so long. It's a very good video, goes very in depth. Unfortunately, I'm never going to get to that level of rebuilding spindles. It's just not going to happen, being realistic. But there's a few things that I wanted to mention. Now, a few people said you need to make sure that the height differences of these are correct for the preload on the bearings. Now, that's not how these bearings work. These NSK bearings, they're still sealed in the packet, so it's going to be very difficult to show you. But the preload on these bearings, the reason you can buy them in light, medium and heavy preload is because the preload is ground into the inner race. So the inner race and the outer race are not flush. They only become flush when the spacers on the bearing on the inner race and the collar pushes down onto that bearing and creates that preload when it levels everything out. So the preload is ground into the bearing, and then when them inner and outer races become parallel, that is when the preload is set. So you could, in theory, overload it, but it's pretty much there. You're not setting the preload with the collar, you're setting the preload with the spacers, which need to be level. So the inner and the outer spacer need to be the same height. Now we've put these on the granite plate and run a clock over them, and they're not perfect. So I think as much as I want to get this spindle rebuilt and back into the machine, I'm going to send these out to the grinders and just get them to lick over them to make sure that they are parallel, parallel faces, as good as they can get. And then on the main bearing shrink fit collar, it's very pitted on the outside and the top, which is irrelevant. It makes no difference. The inner surface is okay, but the front face is also, we put it on the surface plate, and it's also got a low spot, which means when you're pressing onto the bearing, you're not going to have a perfectly flat contact patch, because that face is not going to be perpendicular to the ID or this shaft. So I'll need to get someone to clock this up perfect and then lick that face to make sure it's true. And as much as I want to get it put back together, like I just said, realistically, I've come this far, I may as well try and do it properly, and then hopefully we'll get the longevity in the spindle and it will last. So I need to send them out and get them done, but we're almost ready to go. The one last thing I wanted to mention was, I went back and realised that my spindle, if I find it, didn't have a wave washer fitted on the top bearings. Now, if you look at the diagram, and this is from the Haas service manual. So it's a 7.5K spindle, belt drive. You can see the big pulley up there, which is a 1 7/8 pulley, it says. You've got your two top bearings here, there and there, which is item 12. Now item 12 says it's a 6010 open bearing. Now that's a standard bearing, so I thought, this must have had angular contact bearings, so it must be wrong. So I went out and I purchased just a set of high quality, which is SKF 6010 bearings. Then in between them bearings, you can see, you just about see, item 14 there. Item 14 is a wave washer. Now I didn't have a wave washer in my spindle, so obviously someone's had it apart at some point, I thought, and they've forgotten. So I went online and I had to get this from a company called 123 Bearings, which are in France, and it's £16 for the wave washer and £16 for the delivery, and it's quite heavy duty. That is a strong wave washer. So I bought them, and then whilst talking to the owner of Midland Machine Tool Recon Limited, Steve, I said, I mentioned first off about the wave washer, that I didn't have one in the spindle. Well, he said, well, you're not going to have one. You've got angular contact bearings at the top. Then he said, you said they're NSK. Angular bearings, correct? And I said, yeah, that's correct. He said, well, you can't put a wave washer in them because you won't be able to achieve the preload. I said, well, the diagram's definitely got a wave washer. And then when I looked at the diagram, I realised it just says 6010 open bearings. So I delved a bit deeper and I went through all the spindle assembly drawings. So a 7.5K spindle has got 6010 open bearings with a wave washer. A 7.5K 50 taper spindle has got 6010 open bearings with a wave washer. A 7.5K through spindle coolant spindle has got 6010 open bearings and a wave washer. But, now here's the thing, a 10K spindle has no wave washer and it has light angular contact duplex bearings, which is what this had, light angular contact precision bearings at the top as well as the bottom. So I believe that my spindle, I'll just show you this diagram here to compare to the one I just showed you, that you can actually see the diagram, that it shows you the angular contact bearings and it lists them down here. LT angular contact duplex, which is the bearing, item 12, yeah. So you're looking at 12 up here, shows you the bearings, and there's no wave washer. So it seems that this spindle, excuse me, which is the original from my VF03, is a 10K spindle. Now this has obviously been, the machine is set as 7.5K. I've no idea if that's just a parameter change and I could run 10K, I'm not too sure, or whether there's a difference in the actual spindle motor. Or the gearbox. Again, I don't know. I'm not really fussed about getting to 10K. It's not listed as an option on the sticker in the back of the cabinet, so I assume this has been changed at some point. And I think the drawbar that's still in the VF3 is the original one. And I believe that that is a through spindle coolant drawbar as well. So maybe this was from a donor machine. So yeah, there's a bit of information for you that I didn't know and I've learnt. So it seems that if you've got angular contact bearings at the top, rather than a standard run-of-the-mill open bearing, then you've got a 10K spindle. Now price difference wise, it says you don't need the angular contact at the top, and that makes quite a difference if you're replacing the bearings, because 2 standard bearings and a wave washer cost me £55. 2 angular contact bearings for the top is 380 something pounds. So it's quite a big difference. And if you're not going to run 10K, it seems there's no point. But I'd already bought them, and luckily enough for me, it wasn't as much of a waste of money. I'll keep these spares for probably the other spindle, but these angular contact for the top are the ones I got off eBay as a new old stock for £60. So I'm going to fit them anyway. And then I'll keep these ones for one of the other spindles because I'll probably rebuild them as well. So that's the update on the spindle. That's where we're at so far. I'll send these off and get them ground. And then we are good to go back together, I think. One last thing I wanted to show you. A few of you guys had mentioned before about obviously sticking tools, taper being bad, and the other thing was the drawbar false. what's your pressure on your drawbar. Now, it's very difficult for you to test that unless you've got the correct tool. I spoke to a company who could come round and pay a charge to do that. Now you get, it's just a normal BT40 taper looking tool, but it's got a pressure gauge on it. The pull stud is drawn up into the spindle and it gives you a reading on the gauge. So it's a 2-second job to sort of put it in the tool, put it in the spindle. There's your reading, put it in your other spindle, because I've got 2 machines, so I'd like to check both. Put it in your other spindle. There you go, it's a quick job. But the company's not local, so they've got to travel. And the cost to do is £300 plus VAT. Now, I don't quibble their price. My quibble was, I kind of think a tool to buy it and own it outright is £500 plus VAT. So there was a £200 difference. And I decided in my situation that for £200, I'd rather own the tool and have it for future reference. So I went to a company in the UK called Western Tooling Limited. Nice guy there. They had these in stock. And what you get is you get the drawbar false gauge. So it's just got bar and PSI oil filled gauge on there. And you'll see it doesn't come with a stud because you have to fit the one that you require. So you put a pull stud in it, and then you'll see this top section isn't fully attached to the bottom. So this bit locks into your taper, and then this bit will move up and down with the false and give you your reading on the gauge. Now, you can go online and find that for a VF series Haas with a 7.5K spindle, they say £1,460 to £2,300. Apologies about the airline. That equates to 662 kilos to 1,043 kilos. Now, they gave us a chart here which shows you bar, so the reading on there equating to the kilograms. So 660 is about 32 bar on the low end, and 1,040 takes you up to about, say, 30 to 50 bar. So if we take this over to the machine, if I just stand you there, now I'll jog the spindle head down. Well, actually I need to turn the air on, so bear with me. For once I turn the compressor on so it doesn't go off mid-video. That's the air back on. Now we should be able to just remove my low air alarm I've got. I'll jog the spindle down so it's in a bit better view. And then you just take your gauge, put it into the spindle. And if you guys can see there, we are at just over 40 bar. So we're on the low end. So well, maybe in the middle. I'm thinking it's 32 or 34 bar to about 50 something. So we're roughly in the middle. So we're not too low down, but we've got a little way to go yet. So we could benefit from rebuilding and replacing the Belleville washers on that drawbar, which is what I'm going to do when the spindle is redone. Now, as a comparison, I've got my VF0E here. I'll do the same on that. We'll put it in here. And you see that this one is actually about a bar lower than the other one. So that is at around 39 bar of false. So again, it's not out of spec, but it's also on the low side. So it could do with benefiting from a rebuild. So a very handy tool to have, and I decided that I'd rather pay the extra 200 and have that for future reference rather than having somebody come in for the £360 charged just for one-time use. If they were local, maybe it would have been a sight cheaper. So if you have got a service guy coming in anyway, you could probably get it checked at the same time as something else. So yeah, that's the update of where we are. Spindle's back, it's straight, it's been reground. We need to sort out getting these ground so that they're parallel faces. And then once that's done, I'll bring you back and we'll look at reassembling the spindle. So please like and subscribe if you like the content. Cheers for watching, and we'll see you again soon.